You know, as teens, we all have questions about faith and religion, but we've all been too scared to ask. Well, here at 1315, we strive to answer those questions so that you can boldly stand up for your faith in everyday scenarios, like over a cup of coffee. So, grab your coffee mugs and let's dive into today's episode. Good afternoon, everybody, or whenever you're choosing to view this podcast. I'm Caleb Eckerd. I'm actually the primary host of 1315, and I'm excited that y'all have chosen to tune in and to listen. It's something that encourages me and it excites me, and I hope that it's impactful to you or to the lives of others around you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's just jump in and start working our way through the newness of the podcast 1315. So, a little bit of introduction to myself. My name is Caleb Eckerd. I am 17 years old at the time of the recording for this first episode, and I'm your normal, everyday high school student. I go to school starting at 7:20 every morning, and I leave school at 1:50 every morning. So, some of y'all may have different schedules than that, but whatever. All I'm trying to say is, I'm just a normal high school student. With that being said, I wanted to provide a resource to people so that they could easily defend their faith when in the midst of opposition, when they are in the face of people who don't necessarily believe what they believe and want to prove them wrong on every opportunity they get. So this is my impact. This is what I feel God has called me to do. So with that being said, let's just jump right in. So where I wanted to start for this first episode is I want to start with why 1315? Like, what the heck does 1315 even stand for? For me, I got the idea to call it 1315 from the verse 1 Peter 3:15. So, I just removed Peter. Sorry, Peter. But 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." So that verse is great, and some people might say it's inspirational, some people might say it's motivational. Whatever they say, why does it apply to us? Why should it apply to a teen that goes to high school? Why should it apply to the kid that sits in your youth group all alone? Why should it apply to anyone you come in contact with? Why does it apply to our lives? Well, I've found that a lot of people my age really struggle to stand up for what they believe in when it comes to their faith. And I started thinking to myself, I was like, well, why do we struggle to stand up for what we believe in? And then I found the answer to my question to actually be a two-part answer. The first part of my two-part answer is that we're ill-prepared to defend our faith. We just straight up have no knowledge of why we believe what we believe. We just believe it. The second reason is that even if we're armed with the knowledge of why we believe what we do, we can never pull the trigger to fire this knowledge, meaning we don't understand how we're supposed to share it. How are we supposed to get the knowledge that we have and relay it to someone else? And that's the point of this podcast. I want to arm Christians with the knowledge that is necessary for them to defend their faith. Furthermore, I want to give you, the listener, practical examples of ways and scenarios where you can and should defend your faith. These are practical examples you can use over coffee, which, if you're paying attention, explains the cover art to the podcast. Throughout the podcast, you'll hear examples from stories in my life and a guest speaker's life, and a multitude of other people. Every episode will address an apologetics style question or series of questions that's associated with a question around the Bible, science, God, history, morality, all of those topics. We will discuss questions on the topics of creationism versus Darwinism and where Christianity fits in all of it. The goal is, by listening to this podcast, you will better be able to defend the hope you have in Jesus in everything from debates to classroom discussions to casual conversations at lunch. With that said, let's dive into the actual meat and potatoes of today's episode. So today, we're going to be examining the question, can we trust the Bible? Can we trust the Bible? Is the Bible a reliable source? Recently, an online website came out with an article that listed some of what it considered the most overrated books that you don't need to read. Can you guess what one of the books was? Yup, the Bible. This is what the article said. The Holy Bible is rated highly by all the people who supposedly live by it, but who in actuality have not read it. Those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing the man has ever produced. It's repetitive, self-contradictory, sensuous, foolish, and even at times ill-intentioned. With more and more people saying things such as this, the Bible has been refuted as a good source of information because of religious bias. However, what's even worse is that now people do not accept the Bible as a useful, historically reliable document. When you're going to share your faith with a person or use information from the Bible as a resource, this could pose a serious issue. Atheists and skeptics make serious claims against the Bible to prove that it's not a good source and that it's a false document. If you don't have a response to these claims, then these claims can seriously make you doubt your faith. Here we're to show you what are our grounds for faith. Here's some of the claims that people make against the Bible, and there are a few ones that we'll address in the episode. So, starting with one of the issues that people have with the Bible, there is such a large gap in between when the original document was produced and now, so it just can't possibly be true. There aren't many copies of the Bible for it to be accurate enough. We don't have enough early manuscripts. Or some atheists might say, did you know there's over 400,000 variances in the Bible and the original text? How do we know we have it like it was originally written? Another, the disciples could have just known the Old Testament and rewritten what could have happened. Or the most common one, there's so many contradictions within the Bible. Noah's Ark, the angel appeared to Mary in one gospel and Joseph in another. Or another famous controversy, was Mary even a virgin? The Hebrew word simply means young maiden, not virgin. All of these questions are great. Now, there's a verse from Proverbs that I absolutely love, and it's Proverbs 18:17, and it says, "The first to speak in court sounds right, until the cross-examination begins. Isn't that incredible? So, the first to insert their belief is always going to sound right. That is, until the cross-examination begins. That's what we're here for. We are here to be the cross-examination. Meaning, we're here to give the second side, the side that often goes untold or untaught. The goal is to approach this issue from a historically defensible proof for the validity of the Bible. In a discussion, because God said it's true, saying because God said it's true, referring to the Bible, is an irrelevant point. There are three things we'll look at. Could the story have changed over time? Do the stories line up with each other? And is there external evidence for the claims made in the Bible? Could the story have changed over time? We want to know what's the time gap from the occurrence of the events in the Bible to the time we have our first manuscripts of. So, just to throw out some details for you, we have manuscripts and pieces of manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark from the early 30s and 40s. Now, I'm not talking 1930s or 1940s. I'm talking about 30s, the literal AD 30s and the literal AD 40. That is less than 10 years from the life of Jesus. Isn't that incredible? How close they are? But we see manuscripts about Caesar and Plato's tetralogy, which are some of the most famous people and works of literature that are cited today among history. The time gaps between the manuscripts and the time they were recorded was between 750 and 1200 years. That's crazy. The average gap for the ancient world is 500 years. 500 years is the average gap. So we have portions of John, they're merely 40 years difference. This is along with the information from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the average time gap for the ancient world is 500 years. Intriguing, right? Yet, no one questions Caesar or Plato's tetralogy, even though there are many more, they are hundreds of years past the ancient average. Dan Wallace, one of the world's leading textual critics, said this: "We have more and earlier manuscript evidence for Jesus than anyone else in history." Okay, this is a textual critic, one of the world's leading textual critics, including that of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. How many of y'all have been in world history and learned about Caesar and Alexander the Great? I know how I have, and they're simply taught as fact. Yet there's far less evidence for the life of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. For Caesar, we have 10 manuscripts that document his life. For Plato's Tetrarch, a whopping 13 manuscripts. Moving up here, right? Awfully quick. Tacitus, who is actually, he's the most accepted Roman historian. He's, I want to say praised in a sense. He's he's the example. He's the great example of a great historian from the ancient world. So for the life of Tacitus, we accept all of his works, but there's only 20 manuscripts. Twice that of Caesar, but 20 still doesn't really all seem like that much. All three of those added up, 13 plus 10 plus 20, do some quick math in my head, and that's 43. 43 manuscripts between three people. And then you get to the New Testament, okay? So if you look at the New Testament, there's 23,000 manuscripts. 23,000. Not just 23. Oh no, 23,000. So people say, that's great. There's so many copies. There's so many copies. That's great. That's great. I love that there's so many copies. That's what all the people say in their little "but sir" voice, you know what I mean? They'll point out that there's 4,000 textual variants in the Bible. 4,000 textual variants. Meaning, for every word, there could be 2-3 different words that could have been in place in that during the original manuscript. It's awfully confusing, isn't it? Until you shake out the numbers, till you do a little bit of sifting, then you discover where they get this fact from, right? It's always important to analyze your statistics. Always ask people how they came to that conclusion. A majority of these errors are spelling and pronoun replacement. Wow. Spelling and pronoun replacement. So spelling, I can understand that. A little bit of information about myself. I'm an awful speller. I'm like the worst. I think it's absolutely hilarious that I wrote a book. I think that's so funny that I did. And honestly, English is my worst subject in school. Anyway, so I know how that goes. Spelling errors. I get it. I get it there. But then pronoun replacement. So what is pronoun replacement? Well, instead of saying he, maybe one author said Jesus. Maybe instead of saying he, another author said Jesus Christ. Maybe another, as he copied it down, instead of saying he, referring to Jesus, he said our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ the Messiah. Wow, that's a mouthful, right? And that's a whole lot more letters. So if you keep having, and I'm air quoting behind my mic, so I wish you could see this, but textual variants, there you go, there's my air quotes, I hope y'all could sense them. So once you shake all those out, right, and you get to the bottom of it, less than 1% of these errors are considered significant. Less than 1%. Less than 1%. Now, how many times have you seen somebody that significantly cares for the for that 1%? In anything, like less than 1%. In the only thing that less than 1% matters is in evangelism. And you know that less than 1% of the population knows Jesus Christ. That's an issue. That's the 1% we care about. So, another common question or statement made against the Bible. Well, the stories just simply don't line up. They don't add up. Okay? Have you read the Bible before? Have you read the New Testament? Have you read all 4 Gospels and then further on, have you read Acts, the continuation of the Gospels? Have you? I don't think so. See, the interesting thing is that I can hoot and holler and scream all I want over this point, that they do line up, but it's never going to be enough for me to just say that they do, right? You can't just take my word for it. You have to go do a little bit of digging yourself. That means you're going to have to open up God's word and examine it and see, do they really line up? And I think what you'll find, as a matter of fact, I know what you'll find, is that they do line up. And they line up with beautiful and miraculous symmetry. God's design is absolutely beautiful in how he has inspired his word. Had to get a sip of coffee. Love a good cup of coffee. So, I want to move on to the last point. Try and keep these episodes short because I know it's hard to sit down and listen to a podcast that's extremely long. It's also really hard to listen to something that you can't really listen to in a car ride. That's kind of my goal. So think about a car ride there and back. Most places is 15 minutes out, 15 minutes back, about 30 or so minutes. So that's what we're striving for right now. It's what we're striving for. Yeah. Okay. So is there external meaning outside of the Bible? Is there external evidence for the claims made in the Bible? My answer, and I took some notes for this. I typed up kind of a plan so I wouldn't lose track of what I said. And literally in my notes, I wrote, yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. The first example that points to the validity of the Bible is that of the fossil records, and then it has evidence that supports a worldwide flood. Among some of these examples are polystrate trees, which are trees that have been fossilized. But the incredible thing is that when you look at where these trees were fossilized in the ground, they go through different fossil stratum, right? They extend in through multiple fossil stratum. And that's just a fancy word for saying layers. So every different stratum has a difference in years of literally millions of years. So when things take that long, they don't, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, they don't make fossils like that. They don't. Things make fossils when they get covered quickly. So it's impossible for those polystrate trees to exist unless they were flooded over significantly. This occurs in many places in the world, not just in places where flooding is common. Another thing that seems to prove the occurrence of a worldwide flood is the fact that all fossils that are found, the archaeologist says that they must have been covered quickly. All of the amazing fossils were all covered quickly. And what's intriguing is they find these well-covered fossils in places they shouldn't be finding them. But yet they were still covered quickly as if by flood. Another external piece of evidence that I love and is absolutely one of the most astounding things ever is Jericho. So Jericho is the city that the Israelites conquered, it's the city that God brought the walls down on when his people shouted after they marched around the city. So the digging site of Jericho has layers where people built a city on top of 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 a city, and that's how you get these layers in the archaeological digging site. So these layers when they were going back and looking at them, there was a single layer that was charred, that was black, like it had been burned. Well, if you read the Old Testament, what did the Israelites do before they left Jericho? They burned it. They burned the whole city. The Bible also says that when they went for this conquest, it was during harvest season, meaning there would have been jars full of grain. And so when they go back to the time period, when they go back to the layer of city that's supposedly Jericho, that they say this is Jericho when the Israelites were here, because we know because of this, this, and this. They found pots within the walls. Not just any pots, all right? These pots were filled to the brim with grain. Like, isn't that awesome? Like, oh my goodness. So they were filled with grain. Why? Because it was harvest season, and the Bible documents that. Also, one thing that just absolutely amazes me about Jericho is that God spared Rahab even though she lived inside the wall. So Rahab was the prostitute that God spared and said, you will come live amongst my people, and I will make your path right again. So there's one section of wall that did not collapse, or it fell in such a way that the people inside the house would be safe. Now Rahab lived inside the walls, and there's only one spot in all of Jericho where the people in the house could have lived, and it's there that Rahab is supposedly lived. So these are just some short, quick, easy ways to defend the validity of the Bible when you're having a talk with somebody over it. Granted, they're not long, they're not detailed. I'm just trying to get the wheels in your mind starting to turn so you can kind of have some ideas to base off what you're going to have to, I don't want to say up against, because that makes it seem like a competition, but it's not. It's being prepared. It's being readiness. So I encourage you to get out there and do your own research. This is just scratching the surface. Like, maybe not even scratching the surface. It's like writing with a pencil on a piece of paper. Like, it barely scratches anything. So I encourage you to do your own research. And thank you for tuning into the podcast. I hope you will check out our future episodes. We're going to have one between me and a guest that I will be having come and speak, and we'll be talking about our experiences growing up together and how we've learned to defend our faith in school and some of the opportunities that we've had to do that in school. And it's just some hilarious stories that come from it. Kind of understanding how me and one of my friends, we actually tag teamed our teachers while we were in middle school when it came to sharing our faith. So thank you. Go check out groundsforfaith.com. That's grounds, GROUNDS, 4, faith, FAITH.com. That's our blog, and you can check out that for more information. Again, I thank you for listening and hope you'll come back for more episodes.